over today's lecture, we will talk about all the joints of the upper limb, and starting with the shoulder joint. This is the most mobile joint in the body, and because it is most mobile, so it will be least stable, but definitely it is to allow the maximum movement around the shoulder joint. There will be also the structures that will provide the stability to the shoulder joint, and we have previously discussed all the structures that will be associated with the joint. There will be the extracapsular and intracapsular structures. There will be ligaments, bursa, synovial membranes, etc. to provide the stability, and the synovial membrane will secrete the fluid, the synovial fluid, to prevent the friction. So before discussing it, let's look at the structures and the type of the shoulder joint. So the first thing that should come in your mind is what type is the shoulder joint. So it's the ball and socket type, and the ball is the head of the humerus, and the socket is this glenoid cavity, which is part of the scapula. And if we zoom it out, then you can appreciate a fibrocartilage, a rim of the fibrocartilage that is covering this glenoid cavity, and we are calling it the glenoid labrum. So the function of this glenoid labrum is to deepen the glenoid cavity. Next, we will talk about the structures that are basically providing the stability to the shoulder joint. And the stability to the shoulder joint is mostly provided by the tendons of the muscles, and these muscles are the long head of the biceps brachii muscle, which is attached to the shoulder joint through the transverse humeral ligament, and there is a group of a muscle that is called the rotator cuff muscles, and these muscles provide the stability to the shoulder joint. And in this group are involved four muscles that are called the supraspinatus muscles, that is above the spine of the scapula, the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, the res minor, and the subscapularis muscle. You can also appreciate the long head of the biceps brachii muscle, and this long tendon is attached to the shoulder joint through the transverse humeral ligament, and you can appreciate the bursa as well. It also provides the stability to the shoulder joint. And here you can appreciate the tendons of the rotator cuff muscles that are also providing the stability to the shoulder joint. Next, we have the ligaments that also provide the stability to the shoulder joint, and these are the coracoacromial ligament. By the name, you can guess that this ligament is arising from the coracoid process or the scapula and inserting into the acromial process of the scapula. So this beak-like process here is the coracoid process, and it is arising from the coracoid process, and it is inserting into the acromial process of the scapula. Next, we have the coracohumeral ligament, and once again it is arising from the coracoid process, and it is inserting into the humerus. That's why we are calling it the coracohumeral ligament. Next, we have the glenohumeral ligament, and this is arising from the glenoid cavity, and it is inserting into the humerus. So these are some of the ligaments that are involved in the stabilization of the shoulder joint. So the type of the shoulder joint is the ball and socket joint, and it is the most mobile in the body, so definitely it will be more prone to the dislocation, especially in children. It is formed by the glenoid cavity of the scapula and the head of the humerus, and it is well padded with the protective bursae, The capsular ligament is very loose inferiorly to allow for the free movement normally possible at this joint. So the capsular ligament will be loose inferiorly to allow the free movement of the shoulder joint. The glenoid cavity is deepened by a ring of the fibrocartilage that is called the glenoid labrum that we just saw in the image. This fibrocartilage rim is deepening the glenoid cavity, and we are calling it the glenoid labrum. Next we have the glenoid. After glenoid labrum, we have the tendons of the long head of the biceps brachii muscle, which is held in the intertubercular, which is also called the bicipital groove of the humerus, and it is basically connected to the joint cavity through the transverse humeral ligament. Synovial membrane forms a sleeve around the part of the tendon of the long head of the biceps brachii muscles within the capsular ligament and covers the glenoid labrum. So the synovial membrane is an intracapsular structure that lies within the capsular ligament and covers the glenoid labrum. The joint is stabilized partly by a number of ligaments, the glenohumeral, coracohumeral, and the transverse humeral, but mainly by the muscles and their tendons present in the shoulder. Some of these muscles collectively are called the rotator cuff, and the rotator cuff injury is a common cause of the shoulder pain. So a patient with the rotator cuff injury would have a dull ache in the shoulder joint, and the cause for the rotator cuff injury can be the accident and also the overuse of the shoulder joint that can cause tearing of these muscles. The stability of the joint may be reduced if these structures together with the tendon of the bicep muscles are stretched by the repeated dislocations of the joint. So till now we have talked about the type of the shoulder joint. We talked about all the structures that are associated for the stabilization of the shoulder joint. We studied that the muscle tendons are basically more involved in the stabilization of the shoulder joint, and those muscles are the long head of the bicep brachii muscle that was traveling within the intertubercular of the bicipital groove, and it is extended to the joint cavity through the transverse humeral ligament. And then we talked about the rotator cuff muscles, and the rotator cuff muscles are basically it is a group of 4 muscles, and that is providing the stability to the shoulder joint. And these muscles are the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and the subscapularis muscle. And the rotator cuff injury is very common, and it is a very common cause of the shoulder pain, and it can be caused by the accident or by the overuse that can cause the tearing of these muscle tendons. Next, we will talk about the movements around the shoulder joint and all the muscles that are responsible for the movements. As we know that this is a ball and socket type joint, so basically it would be a multi-axial joint, meaning it will allow movements at various axes. So there can be extension, flexion, abduction, adduction, lateral rotation, medial rotation, and circumflexion at the shoulder joint. And there are various muscles involved for these movements. First, we will talk about the extension, and for the extension, we have the latissimus dorsi and the teres major muscle. Here we have the teres major muscle, and we know that the teres minor is just below the deltoid muscle, and these are the deep muscles. The teres major and teres minor both are the deep muscles. Latissimus dorsi is not shown in this image, but for the extension around the shoulder joint, you have the latissimus dorsi and the teres major muscle involved at the shoulder joint. Next we have the flexion, and for the flexion we have the coracobrachialis muscle and the pectoralis major muscle that are involved for the flexion at the shoulder joint. So here we have the coracobrachialis muscle, and you can see that it is arising from the coracoid process of the scapula, and it is inserting into the humerus. That's why we are calling it the coracobrachialis muscle. And the other muscle that is involved for the flexion is the pectoralis major muscle. So this is a superficial muscle. So till now we have talked about two movements. We have talked about the extension, and for the extension we studied that the latissimus dorsi and the teres major muscle, these two muscles are involved. And for the flexion we talked about the coracobrachialis muscle and the teres major muscle. These two muscles are involved for the flexion at the shoulder joint. Next we have the abduction, and the abduction is caused by the deltoid muscle, and this is the deltoid muscle, which is the superficial muscle. Next we have the adduction. Abduction is moving your arm away from the body, and the adduction is moving your arm towards the body. So for the adduction you have one extensor, and the other muscle is the flexor of the shoulder joint, and the extensor is the latissimus dorsi muscle, and the flexor is the pectoralis major muscle. So for the adduction you have the latissimus dorsi and the pectoralis major muscle. Then we have the lateral rotation, and for that you have the teres minor muscle, that is one of the muscle from the rotator cuff and the posterior part of the deltoid. So for the lateral rotation you have the teres minor, which is one of the muscle of the rotator cuff muscle, and the posterior part of the deltoid muscle responsible for the lateral rotation. Next we have the medial rotation, and for that you have the adductors, that are the latissimus dorsi and the pectoralis major, and you have the teres major and the interior part of the deltoid muscle. And circumduction is the combination of action of all these muscles. Next we have the elbow joint, and this is how the elbow joint is formed. On the interior view you can appreciate the formation of the elbow joint by the three bones, and these are the radius, ulna and the humerus. And the parts of these bones that are involved for the formation of the elbow joint are the head of the radius, the trochlear notch of the ulna, the trochlea of the humerus, and the capitulum of the humerus. So the capitulum of the humerus will accommodate the head of the radius. The trochlear notch will accommodate the trochlea of the humerus. This is the interior articular surfaces. And posteriorly you can appreciate the olecranon process of the ulna, that is accommodated by the olecranon fossa of the humerus. So these parts are basically involved, and this is a hinge type, and this is the most stable joint. This hinge joint is formed by the trochlea and the capitulum of the humerus and the trochlear notch of the ulna and the head of the radian. It is an extremely stable joint because the humeral and the ulnar surfaces interlock and the capsule is very strong. Extracapsular structures consist of anterior, posterior, medial and lateral strengthening ligaments which contribute to the joint stability. So you have the structures that are involved for the stabilization of this joint, and here you can appreciate the joint capsule which is providing the strength to this joint, and also there are the anterior, posterior, medial and lateral ligaments that provide the joint stability. Next we have the movements and the muscles that are involved at the elbow joint. This is the hinge variety, so definitely there will be limited movement, and the movements that can occur at the elbow joint are the flexion and extension. The biceps is the main flexor of the forearm, and the biceps is the muscle of the interior compartment of the arm, and the action of the biceps will be aided by the brachialis muscle, and the triceps is the main extensor of the elbow joint, and this is the antagonist of the biceps brachial muscle. It has the opposite action to the biceps muscle. Biceps is a flexor of your elbow joint, while the triceps is doing opposite to the biceps. It is extending your elbow joint. So here you have the biceps. This is the muscle of the interior compartment of your arm, and the triceps is the muscle of the posterior compartment of the arm. So the triceps will extend your elbow joint while the biceps will flex your elbow joint, and the action of the biceps will be aided by the brachialis muscle. Next we have the proximal and distal radioulnar joints, and here you can see how they are formed. Proximally, this is the head of the radius that is accommodated by the ulna. There will be a notch, a radial notch that will accommodate the head of the radius, and the strength to the proximal radioulnar joint is provided by the annular ligament and also by the quadrate ligament to this joint. And here you can appreciate the distal radioulnar joint. And between the radius and ulna there is the interosseous membrane that provides these extra stability to this joint. The proximal radioulnar joint is a pivot joint formed by the rim of the head of the radius rotating in the radial notch of the ulna, and is in the same capsule as the elbow joint. The annular ligament is a strong extracapsular ligament that encircles the head of the radius and keeps it in contact with the radial notch of the ulna. The distal radioulnar joint is a pivot joint between the distal end of the radius and the head of the ulna. Note in addition the presence of a fibrous membrane linking the bones along the shaft. This interosseous membrane is a type of fibrous joint and prevents separation of the bones when force is applied at either end, that is at the wrist of the elbow. Okay, so once again you have the proximal radioulnar joint and the distal radioulnar joint. At the proximal radioulnar joint you can see the head of the radius that will rotate within the radial notch of the ulna, and this is a pivot type of joint, and distally you can see the head of the ulna that will rotate within the articular surfaces for the ulna, um, that is the part of the radius. So these two are the pivot type of joint, and between this is a fibrous joint that is due to the interosseous membrane, and it is providing the stability to these two bones. And you can also appreciate the ligaments, the extracapsular ligaments, that are providing the stability to the proximal radioulnar joint. Next we have the muscles and the movements around the proximal and distal radioulnar joint. The forearm may be pronated, turned palm down, or supinated, turned palm up. Pronation is caused by the action of the pronator teres, and supination by the supinator and the biceps muscle. So here you have the actions of the muscles that are responsible for the supination and pronation at the forearm. So here you have the biceps brachii muscle and the supinator muscle that can cause the supination. For the pronation, you have the pronator muscle. So in this image, the palm is facing downwards, or we can say that palm is in the pronation phase, and the muscle that is involved for the pronation is the pronator teres and the pronator quadratus. When they both will contract, then the pronation will occur at the forearm. And for the supination, you have the supinator and the biceps brachii muscle. When these two muscles will contract, then the supination will occur at the forearm. Next we have the wrist joint, which is very important. And for the wrist joint, always remember that the ulna will not be involved for the formation of the wrist joint. Distally, the wrist joint will be formed by the proximal row of the carpal bones. This is the distal wrist joint, and this is the proximal wrist joint. And distally, there are the three carpal bones that are involved, except the pisiform. You have the scaphoid, lunate, and the triquetrum that are involved for the formation of the wrist joint. And proximally, you have the distal end of the radius and the articular disc. Here you have the articular disc and the radius that is involved for the formation of the wrist joint, but not the ulna. The ulna is not directly taking part in the formation of the wrist joint. So proximally, you have the radius, the distal end of the radius, and this articular disc, and you have distally the carpal bones that are the scaphoid, lunate, and the triquetrum. Next we have the ligaments that are providing the strength to the wrist joint, and these ligaments can be on the palmar aspect, and they will be on the dorsal aspect as well. So you have the ulnar collateral ligaments, the palmar radiocarpal ligament, and the radial collateral ligament. So you have the collateral ligaments and the palmar radiocarpal ligaments. So the type of the wrist joint is a condylite joint between the distal end of the radius and the proximal ends of the scaphoid, lunate, and the triquetrum. A disc of white fiber cartilage separates the ulna from the joint cavity and articulates with the carpal bones. It also separates the inferior radioulnar joint from the wrist joint. Extracapsular structures consist of the medial, lateral ligaments and anterior and posterior radiocarpal ligaments. Next, we have the muscles that are involved for the movements around the wrist joint, and these are the muscles that are basically involved for the movements around the wrist joint, and we will discuss them individually. So for the flexion, you have the flexor carpi radialis and the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. So these are the flexors that are responsible for the flexion at the wrist joint. The flexor carpi ulnaris and the flexor carpi radialis. These two muscles are responsible for the flexion around the wrist joint. Next, you have the extension, and for the extension, you have the extensor carpi radialis and extensor carpi ulnaris muscle. The extensor carpi radialis and extensor carpi ulnaris muscle. So these two are the extensor for the wrist joint, and these two are the flexor for the wrist joint. Next, we have the adduction, and for the adduction you have the flexor of the radialis and the extensor carpi radialis muscle. So for the adduction, meaning you are moving your hand towards the body, and for this movement the muscles that are involved are the flexor carpi radialis muscle and the extensor carpi radialis muscle. So both the flexor and the extensor of the radialis are responsible for the adduction at the wrist joint. Next, you have the abduction, meaning you are moving your hand away from the body, and for that you have the ulnaris, extensor of the ulnaris and the flexor of the ulnaris muscle. So for the abduction, you have the flexor carpi ulnaris and the extensor carpi ulnaris muscle responsible. Next, we have the joints of the hands and the fingers, and in this diagram you can appreciate different joints. So here you can see the carpal metacarpal joints. Then you have metacarpal joints, the interphalangeal joints. In the thumb, as you have only two phalanges, so there will be interphalangeal joint, but in the fingers you would have a proximal interphalangeal joint and a distal interphalangeal joint. So there are synovial joints between the carpal bones, between the carpal and the metacarpal bones, and between the metacarpal and the proximal phalanges, and between the distal phalanges. So movement at the hand and the finger joints is controlled by the muscles in the forearm and the smaller muscles within the hand, and there are no muscles in the fingers. Finger movements are produced by the tendons extending from the muscles in the forearm and the hand. The joint at the base of the thumb is a saddle joint, which is very important because it allows various movements at the thumb, and you can move your thumb in different axes, and this joint will allow you to hold a pen or a cup, and also the fine manipulation of the objects held in the hand. The joints between the metacarpals and the finger bones allow movement of the fingers. The fingers may be flexed, extended, adducted, abducted, and circumducted, with the first finger more flexible than the others. The finger joints are hinge joints and allow only flexion and extension. The flexor retinaculum is a strong fibrous band that stretches across the front of the carpal bones, forming the carpal tunnel. This is a very important tunnel, and this through this carpal tunnel passes the median nerve, and this median nerve, when it is compressed, it can cause the carpal tunnel syndrome, and the patient will complain about having tingling sensations within the hand. So the carpal tunnel, basically it is a narrow passageway that will be surrounded by the bones and the ligaments on the palmar side of your hand, and because through this passage passes the median nerve, and when it will be compressed, it will cause symptoms, and the patient will complain you having the numbness and the tingling sensations and also the weakness in the hand and arm. So the tendons of the flexor muscles of the wrist joint and the fingers and the median nerve pass through the carpal tunnel, the retinaculum holding them close to the bones. Synovial membrane forms sleeves around these tendons in the carpal tunnel and extends some way into the palm of the hand. Synovial sheaths also enclose the tendons on the flexor surfaces of the fingers. Their synovial fluid prevents friction that might damage the tendons as they move over the bones. The extensor retinaculum is a strong fibrous band that extends across the back of the wrist. Tendons of the muscles that extend the wrist and the finger joints are encased in the synovial membrane under the retinaculum. The synovial fluid secreted prevents the friction. As we have discussed earlier, that the function of the synovial fluid is to prevent the friction. So this is the flexor retinaculum, that is on the palmar aspect of the hand, and this is the extensor retinaculum that lies on the dorsal aspect of the hand. And there are various muscle tendons that are responsible for the formation of this retinaculum. So that's all for today, and if you have any question regarding this lecture, then you can ask. Thank you so much.